Hello everybody, my name is Zach with Overrated Gamers, and today we're going to be doing a deck tech on Horde of Notions. This is an elemental tribal deck. He is one of every color for a 5/5, Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. Pay one of every color. You may play target elemental card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. You can activate this ability at instant speed. Play has been eroded to cast, so if it has a cast trigger like Maelstrom Wanderer, you can pay 5 and play it from the graveyard and you'll get any cast triggers it may have. I think he is the only elemental with a cast trigger in there. But let's go through the elementals. Our first one is Flamekin Harbinger. She's 1 red, 1/1. She comes into play. You can search your library for an elemental card, reveal it, shelf your library, and put it on top. So you can either play her early on, or you can cast her from the graveyard for 5 during an opponent's turn. That's a lot of mana to tutor, but it is instant speed, and this is a bit of a toolboxy deck. So it's Reanimator combined with a toolbox. We're going to go over our Evoke minions first. Our first one is Aethersnipe. He's 1 and 2 blue. He returns a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. But he has an evoke cost, and what that means is you can cast it with for evoke. If you do, it's sacrificed when it comes in, so it enters, does its effect, and then you sacrifice it. Generally, you do want to sacrifice the evoke elementals so you can recast them later with Horde of Notions. We do also have things like Living Death in here, so you can just bring out all your guys and just kill a bunch of people off. Next up is Mulldrifter. He's 2 and a blue for his evoke, or 5 and 1 blue. But when he enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. We have Shriekmaw, 5 and a black, 3/2, Fear, meaning he can only be blocked by artifact creatures and black creatures. When he enters the battlefield, destroy a non-artifact, non-black creature. His evoke cost is 1 and a black. We have Wisp-Mire. When it comes into play, destroy target enchantment. Its evoke cost is 1 white, or you can pay 2 a white and it's a 1/3 with flying. We have Ingot Chewer, 5 and a red for a 3/3, or you pay 1 red for its evoke cost, and when it comes into play it destroys an artifact. Revelark, when it comes into play, when Revelark leaves play, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to play. Its evoke cost is actually more than its mana cost. Its mana cost is 4 and a white for a 4/3 flying. Its evoke cost is 5 and a white. Now it does cost more because you're reanimating 2 small creatures, but you can play him, bring back your Wisp-Mire, your Mulldrifter, or your Flamekin Harbinger. So any of these guys. It can also bring back things like Eternal Witness, stuff like that. So that's all of the evoke creatures. Generally you want to get them into the grave as soon as possible so you can start bringing them back with your commander. We do have a lot of sacrifice outlets in the deck like Evolutionary Leap, High Market, Sidisi. So we have enough to get them back in there again. Or we can simply just block our opponent's creatures if they swing at us. Ashling the Pilgrim is 1 and a red for a 1/1. You can pay 1 and a red to put a +1/+1 counter on her. If it's the 3rd time this ability has resolved this turn, remove all +1/+1 counters from her, and she deals that much damage to each creature and each player. So she functions as a living board wipe, and she can also just slowly get bigger. You put 2 on her during your turn, 2 during an opponent's turn, and you keep just putting more and more counters. She gets bigger and bigger, and you can just blow her up later, killing everything on the board, killing players. She's got a lot of versatility, and she's also a board wipe. I mean, what's not to love on that? She does, of course, kill herself when she does that. We have Incandescent Soulstoke. So this is one of the ways that we can get other elementals into play very quickly and to fill up our graveyard with our elementals if we plan to Living Death, or if we just want to recast them with our commander. He's 2 and a red for a 2/2. Other elementals you control get +1/+1, but you can pay 1 red and tap him to put an elemental creature from your hand onto the battlefield. It gains haste until end of turn, and sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. It's worth noting that if you do this in the middle or end of a player's end step, then it sticks around till the following end step. So you can do this at the end of an opponent's end step, and it'll stay to the beginning of your end step. So if you want to just get a creature out so you can swing at someone, or because you have other effects you wish to do on your turn, you can do it with this guy. Lord of Extinction. Oh, we have Lord of Extinction. It's three a black and a green, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in all graveyards. It's worth noting that effects like this apply no matter what zone he's in. So if there's something that for some reason wants you to search for it based on power or toughness, it's applied even when it's not in play. So in your graveyard it's not a 0/0. But this is just in here as a nice big finisher. It's something the deck kind of has a hard time with. Elementals do cool things, but not many of them swing really hard. And I don't run Craterhoof Behemoth in the deck because it's too easy to just always Avenger of Zendikar and Craterhoof. We do run Avenger in the deck because, you know, he's an elemental, why not? But I don't run Craterhoof Behemoth. It's too easy to always just grab that and finish people off. And it's just not fun in this deck. This is a casual fun deck. We have Titania, Protector of Argoth. She's 3 and 2 green for a 5/3. When she enters the battlefield, return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield, and whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 5/3 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. So at the very worst, she'll get back one of your lands, get you a land ahead. At the very best, you want to be targeting things like your fetch lands with her. You can get a fetch land back, immediately sacrifice it, and get a 5/3. Even if you don't have lands to target because it's later in the game, making 5/3s every turn at the cost of 1 life is pretty good. Our next card is actually one of my favorite elementals. It is Whisperwood Elemental. 3 and 2 green. At the beginning of your end step, manifest the top card of your library. Manifesting is you put the top card of your library face down as a 2/2 creature onto the battlefield. You can turn it up, face up any time for its mana cost. Now, it is worth noting with manifest that if you manifest them face up, like if you pay the cost to flip them, it does not count as them entering the battlefield. They've already been on the battlefield. They also don't have any creature types. And if whatever reason somehow your commander got in your deck and you manifested that face down, any damage that does to a player is still commander damage. He has a second effect as well. Sacrifice Whisperwood Elemental until end of turn. Face up non-token creatures you control. Gain whenever this creature dies, manifest the top card of your library. So if someone tries to board wipe, you can sacrifice him, still get an army of creatures out. Of course, it doesn't affect the creatures that are already face down, so if those die, you do not manifest, but if you have a few elementals face up, or you can turn a bunch of them face up in response and then sacrifice him. So he does do a lot of various effects. I mean, if you have a Revelark face down, you can flip that up. It also makes for interesting triggers and stuff. If you attack an opponent, they can block, you can then manifest your creature face up and you suddenly have a bigger creature than them. Or say you swing and Revelark is face down. Well, you can swing with it and then morph it face up. It'll maybe die to a bigger creature and then you get 2 small creatures back. So it allows for a lot of neat combat tricks. And it slowly gets you a small army onto the board. Soul of the Harvest, 4 and 2 green for a 6/6. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. He also has Trample. So this also works with the manifest creatures. They're not technically tokens. But yeah, it kind of speaks for himself. Draws cards when non-token creatures come out. Works very well with the elementals or the other creatures that you have. Draws you a lot of cards. And he's a strong body. We have Green Warden of Marusa. 4 and 2 green for a 5/4. When it enters the battlefield, you can return a card from your graveyard to your hand. When it dies, you can exile it. If you do, return a card from your graveyard to your hand. You rarely ever want to use its death effect. Normally you just recast it with Horde of Notions if you want to get more cards from your graveyard back. You can exile it if you really need something back. Generally I wouldn't suggest that. It's recurring or Eternal Witness. You can just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. Getting back either elementals, removal, tutors, lands, whatever you need. And of course, Bane of Progress, 4 and 2 green, 2/2. When it comes into play, destroy all artifacts and enchantments, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each permanent destroyed this way. Destroys your opponent's artifacts, their enchantments, gets really large, swings for a lot of damage. What's not to love on this card? Yes, you're going to destroy a few of your cards, but, you know, it's whatever. We have Vigor. Vigor is 3 and 3 green for a 6/6 trample. Now, a lot of these elementals are pretty expensive in the deck. The deck is a little slow to get started. We do run a few cards that fill your graveyard up rather quickly, and we run a few reanimate spells so that you can get some of these guys out earlier in the game. Most of the early game is just trying to ramp out, get out some of the tutor ones, or get out the Incandescent Soulstoke so you could just drop these guys out quickly and then start reanimating them later in the game. But if damage will be dealt to a creature you control, other than Vigor, prevent that damage, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each damage prevented this way. When Vigor is put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. So you can't really reanimate this one. You can respond to it hitting the graveyard and shuffling by reanimating it. Other than that though, it's kind of hard to reanimate this guy. Now, it's useful in the fact that you can force your opponents to block creatures and they just get bigger, or you can force them, or you're forcing them to just take damage because they don't want to let your creatures get bigger. It deters people from swinging on you at the same time because you block, your creatures get larger and they don't get anything out of that trade. This is a really great card that you can manifest up if you're playing with Whisperwood Elemental. So then you swing with a bunch of your manifested dudes and you turn them up and one of them's Vigor. All your creatures are bigger. If a creature is manifested up, it does keep its counters it originally had, because those just stay on the card. So he's just a powerful, I wouldn't say he's really a beater. You don't really want to swing with Vigor because Vigor can die. But all your other creatures get through or get bigger. It's a large deterrent. We have Omnath, Locus of Mana. 3, 2 red, 2 green for a 5/5. With Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Whenever Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental you control dies, he deals 3 damage to a creature or player. So elementals die and you get lightning bolts. Your fetch lands instantly get you landfall triggers for Omnath. And just playing your regular land drops for turn. We do run Sun Titan, so if you bring a land back from your graveyard, Omnath will create a guy from that. If we sacrifice our elementals, then we can deal 3 damage to people. Now, he is a bit of a pain to get out. I mean, 2 red, 2 green, and 3 on top of it. But once it does come out, it quickly deters people from attacking your elementals. And it gives you massive bonuses if all of them die. If 10 of them die, that's 30 damage to a player. And with him and Titanium making elementals, you can very easily kill one player through the death of your elementals. Avenger of Zendikar, 5 and 2 green for a 5/5. When he enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield for each land you control. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So he spawns a small army, the army gets bigger, and every turn you play more lands, it keeps getting larger. So he just spawns a bunch of dudes, you start hitting people, you have Vigor out, then they really don't want to block them. So it's a win-win. Maelstrom Wanderer. This is also one of my favorite magic cards. 5 mana, a blue, a red, and a green for a 7/5. He gives your creatures haste, and he cascades twice. When you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exiled cards on the bottom in a random order, and then, he does it a second time. He cascades twice. So it's worth noting that you can cast him from your graveyard with Horde of Notions. His mana cost is still 8, because it's a card that costs less. It doesn't care what you paid to cast him. Even if you had something like Omniscience out, he would still cascade for 8. Or, well, you're looking for things for 7 with him. I don't think I have an elemental in this deck that costs more than Maelstrom Wanderer. So he's gonna get you 2 cards that you definitely want. Like, you're not gonna see like 9 or 10 drops that you can't get out with him. We do have sack outlets, so every turn you can just drop him, swing with him and the other card you have, sacrifice him, cast him again, and keep cascading till your board is just full of elementals and other cards. We have Crib Swap. This is 2 and a white. Tribal instant shapeshifter with changeling. This card is every creature type at all times, even though it's an instant. Exile target creature. Its controller puts a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling onto the battlefield. Because this card is changeling, it does count as an elemental, and Horde of Notions can cast it from your graveyard. So you can basically have a removal card at all times that you can repeatedly cast for value. We do run Seedborn Muse in this deck, so if you have Seedborn Muse and your commander out, every turn you can exile 1 creature, and all that they get is a 1/1 with every creature type. It's a very good trade, it's a strong removal spell, it's just kind of fun that it works that way. There are other instants with the changeling type, but this is the only one that I really like because it actually just kills things. We have Evolutionary Leap. It's 1 and a green enchantment. Pay a green and sacrifice a creature. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So you use this to kill your elementals so you can get their enters the battlefield effects again. Or you use this, if someone tries to exile your creature, you can sack it. You get more elementals, you can sacrifice any of your manifested creature tokens. So if you had a land with it, you can look at those at any time. You look at it, you're like, oh, this is a land, but you can Evolutionary Leap it and get an actual creature. Seedborn Muse, 3 and 2 green for a 2/4. Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. Generally you want to play this you can play this before you've played your commander. Then you drop your commander. If someone doesn't remove it at that point, you can just start reanimating during every other player's turn, or you can start dropping your Crib Swap. Sometimes I'll hold back Crib Swap until I've gotten this in my commander out, and just start Crib Swapping things during every player's turn. They run out of creatures. You can start reanimating other creatures once you start getting more mana. Gamble. It's 1 red for a sorcery. So you search your library for a card and put it into your hand, then you discard a card at random. Now this seems like a weird card to put in here, but you actually want to discard the card you tutored for. The way this card was designed is you're supposed to tutor for a card and then you're facing the chance of losing it. The way that we're playing it is we want to discard what we grabbed. So it's really great if this is the only card in your hand and you guarantee that you can discard it to the grave. It's also great if you have a lot of creatures in your hand. There are times where you don't want to play this, if you have important ramp cards or removal or tutors that you really need in your hand, and you want to hold back with playing it. But if you have a lot of creatures in your hand that you want to reanimate, or if just the stuff in your hand isn't that great anyway, then play the gamble, get that card. If you really need a removal spell or something, you can tutor for those too. but you might discard them. Entomb, 1 black instant, search your library for a card and put that card into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. So we use this to get elementals into our graveyard early, or a turn or two before we play our commander. Now it does say any cards, so you could technically put like a land or something in there if you want to for one of the other elementals that bring lands back or something like that. But you usually hit elementals with this, so you can reanimate them with your commander, and it basically just functions as a toolbox. You can get your Ingot Chewer in to kill an artifact, Wisp Mire to kill an enchantment, you can get Mole Drifter to draw 2 cards, you can get Revelark to reanimate 2 things. Phyrexian Reclamation, 1 black enchantment, 1 and a black, pay 2 life, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. This allows you, if you don't have reanimate spells, you can just grab your creatures out of the grave and just cast them like normal, or evoke them repeatedly. So, I mean, it starts to get expensive life-wise, but if you want to kill a couple of artifacts with your Ingot Chewer, or you need to kill a few enchantments with your Wisp Mire, well, I mean, you can pay 2 black and 2 life, get it back, evoke it, do it again, evoke it. Things like that. We don't really have a source of life gain in this deck, other than High Market. It gains you like 1 life. So you do have to be a little careful, as I've stated before. Life in Magic, but especially in Commander, is a resource. And if you're aggressive enough, well, it doesn't really matter how low your life gets as long as you still have that 1 life remaining at the end. Buried Alive, 2 and a black. Search your library for up to 3 creatures and put them into your graveyard. This just puts more creatures in there. As I've said, we get them in there a turn or 2 before our commander comes out, and we can just start getting things out. Necromancy is 2 and a black. You can play it at instant speed, but if you do, the creature you reanimate is sacrificed at the end of the turn. That's part of the reason I play this in here, is so that you can get an elemental out, get its effect, it dies, then you can reanimate it later with something else. You can also just play this at regular speed, just at whenever you can play a sorcery, and it just reanimates a creature and the creature stays. You can hit anything with it, but as with most reanimator decks, you're usually looking to hit your own cards. And finally, Living Death, 3 and 2 black. Each player exiles all creature cards from his or her graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures he or she controls, then puts all cards he or she exiled this way onto the battlefield. So as I said, this deck only has a few really big beaters. Living Death allows you to get a lot of those cards onto the battlefield at once. Hopefully you have something that grants haste, like the Maelstrom Wanderer, and then you can just get a massive blowout on the board, especially if you're bringing back something like your, what's he called? Your Avenger of Zendikar. So if you get your Avenger of Zendikar back out, he summons a bunch of plants, and you haven't played a land yet this turn. So I say he summons like 7 plants or 10 plants, because it's going to be pretty late in the game. Then you crack a fetch land, well, you have a bunch of 2/3s now. And then if you have Incandescent Soulstoke, well, now they're 3/4s, they all have haste. And just those on their own, that's over 30 damage, plus all the other creatures in your graveyard. So those are the main cards that you run in the deck. I will have a full deck list posted in the description as usual. The deck's not exactly extremely strong. This deck is just a fun little side project I made a while back. It's not too expensive to make. Most elementals are pretty cheap now, with the exception being Vigor and Lord of Extinction. I think all the other ones are pretty cheap. I don't run Animar because, I mean, he's 3 different colors. Most of the reason is he was hard to get, but I was looking at him and I only run so many creatures. If you want, you could put him in the deck. I haven't really tried him myself. I may try adding him in the future. He does get large and does have protection from black and white. And he does lower the cost of some of the high cost elementals, so I actually probably should put it in here at some point. The deck's weak, obviously, to things like Bojuka Bog, things that remove graveyards. There's not too much you can do about that. You can try to return them to your hand at instant speed with Phyrexian Reclamation. if you know your opponent's running black, expect they have Bojuka Bog and try to just play around it a little. Try to be careful with putting cards in your graveyard until you're going to reanimate them, instead of trying to bring them in their return or too early. What this means is sometimes you might have to wait to turn 6 or 7, or even later than that, to start putting cards in your grave. Even until you have like 8 mana for things like Buried Alive, or 6 if you have Entomb or Gamble after your commanders come out. But yeah, so thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you in the next video. We only have one more deck that I personally own to preview, and that one's Eldrazi. After that, we will be figuring something else out. We might have a few guest people come on and have them show us their decks and why they build what they use, or why they run the cards they run in their decks. But that'll be about 2 weeks from now when we move on to some other decks, techs of some kind. We will continue the series, it'll just change a little bit after that.